Okay, I'm going to look today at a poem by Wallace Stevens called A High-Toned Old Christian Woman. It's from his first book, Harmonium. It came out in the 20s. Stevens lived between the 1870s and the 1950s, associated with high modernism in American poetry and Western poetry. And interestingly to me, because I worked for an insurance company for a number of years, he was a vice president at the Hartford Insurance Company in Connecticut for decades. I think he was a lawyer by training, and so he was an executive there. And that's always been, Stevens is one of my favorite poets. I think he's just amazing and incredible imagination. And I to think of my years at this insurance company, I think of the people that I ran into there in the gallery of people's running through my mind right now. It's a little hard for me to imagine poetry of any kind coming out of or going into any very many of them. Maybe I'm being unfair. I guess you only get a glancing impression of people, even if you work with them for a long time. And people can surprise you, but a surprise it would be. Anyway, I just find it kind of fun to think that he did this all the time, and then went home at night or in whatever other pockets of spare time that he had, created these amazing poems. As I say, the first one is from his High-Toned Old Christian Woman. It's from his first book, that is to say, Harmonium, which came out in the late 20s. It's in my collected poems of Wallace Stevens. I got this book around 1990 in a remainder bin at a Crocs and Brentano's in the Chicago area. It was a chain in the Chicago area, as you may know, and it's gone now. But anyway, $4, best $4 I've ever spent. I've never had a better return on any $4 I've ever spent in my life. So see me for investment advice. So I'll start by reading the poem, and I'll try to make this the last time I say this. I'm not in any sense at all trying to illuminate the golden path to the approach to this or any poem, or God forbid, trying to give you any kind of definitive interpretation of what it is saying, what it wants you to think about. It's just one approach, and as I say, the particulars, the material manifestation of this poem, its language, its rhythm, everything about it, its music, its the way it looks on the page, everything about it, and what it says is all irreducibly its meaning, and the language and symbols and images and all that are not, in my view, to be seen as a kind of way station toward some message, but all of it together is its meaning, and all of it together is if it's a worthy poem and it gives you an experience of the sublime, it takes you to this, it gives you this kind of incommunicable awe, and that is yours alone. And I'm not here to tell you what that is. It's yours alone, but you're also getting there by connecting in this intimate way with another mind and another imagination. So though it is yours alone, you are not alone, if that makes sense. And that's kind of the miracle of poetry and all imaginative creations of the human mind, in principle anyway. So I'll start by reading the poem, A High-Toned Old Christian Woman. Poetry is the supreme fiction, madam. Take the moral law and make a knave of it, and from the knave build haunted heaven. Thus the conscience is converted into palms, like windy citherns hankering for hymns. We agree in principle, that's clear. But take the opposing law and make a peristyle, and from the peristyle project a masque beyond the planets. Thus our bawdiness, unpurged by epitaph, indulged at last, is equally converted into palms, squiggling like saxophones. And palm for palm, madam, we are where we began. Allow, therefore, that in the planetary scene your disaffected flagellants, well stuffed, smacking their muzzy bellies in parade, proud of such novelties of the sublime, such tink and tank and tunk-a-tunk-tunk, may, merely may, madam, whip from themselves a jovial hullabaloo among the spheres. This will make widows wince, but fictive things wink as they will, wink most when widows wince. Okay, so just first, enjoy and savor that unspooling sound. Everything that follows from that emphatic assertion at the beginning, poetry is the supreme fiction, madam, and all the swells and eddies and thrusts and retreats and so forth that follow, and then culminating in the emphatic stresses of the last few lines, the last two lines in particular. And all the alliteration, haunted heaven, hankering for hymns, the squiggling saxophones, the tink and tank and tunk-a-tunk-tunk, phrases like may, merely may, madam, and that pretty dazzling alliterative flourish in the last two lines about the winking and the wincing and all that. It's a nice thing to just have in your mind, and I think that if a person who didn't know a word of English could hear that, and I think get a great deal of pleasure out of it. In fact, also the solemn intonation of it. A lot of the pleasure for me in this poem is how it takes the outward form of a formal rhetorical exercise. The making of a case, an attempt to persuade the person that he's addressing, whom he calls madam, and is evidently the high-toned old Christian woman of the title, attempts to persuade her to his point of view. And it's got this, as I say, very formal and solemn intonation, and proceeds as though it believes itself to be moving in a very orderly way through a rational presentation of some kind, but incorporates all this characteristically playful Stevens language, this kind of signature way he had with language, and I'm going to use a slightly fancy word, the ludic quality of it. There's inside this this flow of words that seems to have it seems to be a formal argument, a disciplined formal argument, is this spirit of carefree verbal play with these kinds of startling images, very playful images, even nonsense words like tink and tank and tunk tunk tunk. So the two of them in this compound is just a lot of fun, and one of the reasons that, though I don't necessarily think it's the most profound of the Stevens poems that I know, it's one that I enjoy quite a bit, and one of the ones I enjoy most. So the first half of the poem gives an account of two opposing principles, two distinct responses, I guess, to the experience of being alive. And the two of them come together to form this kind of stalemate, I would say. The first one, and it seems that he's taking, and maybe I shouldn't say this too loud, but just between you and me and the vintage room air conditioner here, it seems to be taking a slightly disobliging view toward organized religious belief. But that's not the end of it, as we see. The first principle, he seems to be setting kind of a gimlet eye on religious practice and its narratives and all of its concrete manifestations in practice for a lot of people. And then the second principle is more centered on pleasure. So it sets up this kind of binary, it seems, between conventional religiosity and all that it rejects or proscribes, which forms the content of the second principle, I suppose. And I think that he insists on the inadequacy of the second principle equally with the first. Um, let's just look at a few of these things here. The first lines here. Poetry is a supreme fiction, madam. So then we articulate the first principle. Take the moral law and make a knave of it, and from the knave build haunted heaven. So the moral law, which is implicit here, precedes its instantiation in any kind of religious practice, and not the other way around. A person may view it the other way around. It's not difficult today to run into people who believe that outside of belief in a creator deity or some religious tradition, there's no basis for morality. This would seem to me anyway to take the opposite view, that our moral sense precedes any kind of expression of it in practice or in some kind of narrative that helps us make sense out of our lives and our existence and our purpose and so on. So the moral law makes a knave. Take the moral law, make a knave of it, and from the knave build haunted heaven. So the nave, of course, is the central place in a church where the congregation gathers, and so you can get kind of where he's going with this. The moral law is kind of being reduced, and to that, and we're building haunted heaven, which seems like something to fear. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of joy there. And thus conscience is converted into palms, like windy citherns hankering for hymns. So the conscience, our moral sense, is converted, not expressed, but converted, changed, reduced perhaps into palms. And I think the palms, what we're trying to get at there are the practices, the objects, the instruments, the implements, it might not be unfair to say fetish objects of religious practice, and is implicitly, I think, and you get more of the sense as the poem goes on, but is reduced and distorted by that thing, and it doesn't really do justice to it. Like windy citherns hankering for hymns. Okay, so a cithern is a alternate spelling of cittern. It's a stringed instrument, looks like a mandolin. Hankering for hymns. So we agree in principle, that's clear. So they're on the same ground anyway, even if they take a different point of view, he and this madam he's referring to. But then take the opposing law and make a peristyle, and from the peristyle project a masque beyond the planets. So the opposing law, that's very interesting. So the nave of the first principle becomes the peristyle of the second. The peristyle is, of course, a circular formation of columns. It can be around a building. It can be around an empty space where people gather. It can be a religious or devotional sort of facility or installation, whatever. But it's not only that. It has other valences, I guess I would say, and that becomes from the nave. Whereas from the nave we build haunted heaven. From the peristyle we project a masque beyond the planets. Masque, M-A-S-Q-E. Of course, they were popular in the Elizabethan age. It's not a play really. It's a display, aesthetic display involving costume figures, often very ornate costume figures, poetry, song, etc. But it's an aesthetic display, and it's meant for pleasure. The second principle seems rooted in pleasure, whereas the first principle, the nave, we build haunted heaven, which doesn't seem very pleasurable. It seems a little frightening and baleful. So the second principle, but the masque is projected beyond the planets. So this opposing principle seems to claim all of the transcendent warrant that the first principle had by being projected beyond the planets. And then thus our bawdiness, our pleasure, unpurged by epitaph, not constrained by religious precept, and indulged at last, is equally converted into palms, squiggling like saxophones. So the windy citherns that are hankering for hymns become squiggling saxophones, which, again, this idea of pleasure. But both of the elements of both of them are equally converted into palms. And there's where you get, and then he says, and pound for pound, madam, we are where we began. So we've kind of gotten nowhere. They're just opposing themselves. So if the opposing principle, as it seems to be, is an answer to the first, a kind of reaction formation, something coextensive with it, though in the opposite direction, and composed of corresponding elements that kind of punctually reject those of the first, then whatever might be said about the reductiveness or inadequacy of organized religious belief as a response to the experience and mysteries of being alive may equally be said, it seems to me, about the opposing principle. And so we have these two things that are kind of butting heads. We have this kind of mutual canceling out or futility. We have this kind of stalemate. And I think that's suggested by in palm for palm, we are where we began. Both have their fetish objects, both have their, both are a kind of, each of them is kind of a distortion field that doesn't do justice to the full, our full moral sense, our full being, I guess I would say, or the full vitality of our being and all of its potential and so on. So he lays out this, these are the premises of his arguments, so to speak, with the woman he's speaking with. And then he pivots and he sort of seems to articulate a third way. It's one that seems to lead out of the second because it seems it's more rooted in pleasure than the first. And pleasure, understood as, I think, not something to be apologized for or feel guilty about or anything like that. I think it's he seems to be with Wordsworth in his view of pleasure and kind of celebrating pleasure. In the preface, what Wordsworth called pleasure the grand elementary principle of life. It's the principle by which one, the quote is, knows and feels and lives and moves. It's the grounding of truth in a way. It's far from something that we need to be ashamed of or apologize for or suppress our desire for. It's something to be celebrated and indulged and made part of a full, rounded, and adequate response to the experience of being alive. So the disaffected flagellants, those who, I guess, who reject the first principle, the refugees from from the first principle, well stuffed, smacking their muzzy bellies in parade, proud of such novelties of the sublime, such tink and tank and tunk-a-tunk-tunk. Let's stop right there. So these people are, in tune with pleasure, and this reference to the sublime, I think, is very interesting. First of all, he's locating this, I should have mentioned, allow therefore that in the planetary scene you're disaffected flagellants. So we're not any longer beyond the planets, we're not any longer in haunted heaven, we're just here with ourselves and in our and where we can self-sufficiently create meaningful experiences for ourselves. And what was it? So proud of such novelties of the sublime, such tink and tank and tunk-a-tunk-tunk. So he mentions the sublime here, which we're able to, experiences which we're able to create for ourselves. And at this point, he this phrase, such tink and tank and tunk-a-tunk-tunk, which comes after sublime, comma, and then such tink and tank, etc. So that phrase, that line, is apposite to sublime. He's telling you what he means by sublime. He's telling you, he's amplifying on his idea of the sublime. And it's at that point that he departs from signifying language and uses these kind of playful musical terms instead. And I think that Wallace Stevens knew what sublime really meant. I don't think he ever confused it. I think the evidence here is that he's not confusing it with something that's merely beautiful. He's talking about something incommunicable, some wordless state, some state of awe, states of mind, states of feeling that that we have intimations of, but that are extremely powerful. And he is saying that these novelties, the potential for these kinds of sublime experiences merely may, madam, whip from themselves a jovial hullabaloo among the spheres. So we can whip from ourselves. Again, the source of all this is ourselves and not something external to us or transcendent, but here, immanent and with us. And a jovial hullabaloo, and that's an interesting phrase. Jovial, of course, expresses joy. Hullabaloo is kind of a commotion. It can be kind of a disturbance. So there's kind of a push-pull there between the two of them that implies this more complex view, perhaps, of human beings and and of everything about us. And this seems to be identified, again, the reference to the sublime. It seems to be identified with the imagination in its fullest expression and scope, and that this is seems to be the kind of third way that our speaker here is trying to illuminate for this lady that he's speaking to. All right, so then we get to the, once this, these sublime experiences can be created, these experiences can be had. He by tying that, by calling them fictive things in the last couple of lines, I think that there's the suggestion about the human creativity and the imagination and so forth. So this jovial hullabaloo will make widows wince, but fictive things wink as they will, wink most when widows wince. When I was reading the poem to prepare for this, I kind of was arrested by the two terms wink and wince. Of course, they're it's part of the nice alliteration in the last couple of lines, and they both begin with the same three letters. But it occurred to me they're both also types of physical contraction. You wink, you close your eye. You wince, you're kind of shrinking away from something, and that's a contraction, a physical contraction. But of course, they have very different valences. Wink is kind of engaging and playful, and a wince is timid and fearful. But they have and I looked into it a little bit, and both words have a common etymological root that have, but we're seeing. So we're seeing in that common substratum these diverging tendencies, which I think is kind of interesting, in the context of this poem, and then the reference to the widows. I suppose a widow here is meant to be associated with, again, this timidity and so forth. And I guess I'm thinking of Wallace Stevens writing this in the 1920s. He may be intending, by using the word widow, to invoke a figure that's bereft and kind of pathetic and incomplete without a man and so forth, and not able to deal with life in its full onrushing complexity and so forth. And is there some casual misogyny in there? Sure there is. What are you going to do? So that's a blemish. But on the whole, So there's his argument. There's what it amounts to, and there's a vision of a way to live or to respond to our predicament of being alive that may not be wholly articulable and amenable to formulation in words or in comforting collective experiences and practices and so forth, but nonetheless can, just as this poem does, just as this poem is I think this and many poems by Stevens amounts to gives you this kind of intimate and kind of granular concourse with another mind and another imagination. And you're not alone in that respect. I think it can provide its own kind of comfort and solace. So with that, I will leave it there, and I will read the poem again. A high-toned old Christian woman. Poetry is the supreme fiction, madam. Take the moral law and make a nave of it, and from the nave build haunted heaven. Thus the conscience is converted into palms, like windy citherns hankering for hymns. We agree in principle. That's clear. But take the opposing law and make a peristyle, and from the peristyle project a masque beyond the planets. Thus our bawdiness, unpurged by epitaph, indulged at last, is equally converted into palms, squiggling like saxophones. And palm for palm, madam, we are where we began. Allow, therefore, that in the planetary scene your disaffected flagellants, well stuffed, smacking their muzzy bellies in parade, proud of such novelties of the sublime, such tink and tank and tunk-a-tunk-tunk, may, merely may, madam, whip from themselves a jovial hullabaloo among the spheres. This will make widows wince, but fictive things wink as they will, wink most when widows wince. Okay, so next time I think I'm going to do a poem by Frank O'Hara. And then down the road, there will probably be poems by Dylan Thomas, Adrian Rich, Elizabeth Bishop, E.E. Cummings, I don't know, Louise Gluck, looking at different ones. So anyway, thank you. Bye.